Good morning to all my YouTube viewers. Glad to have you out there with me on the 7th day of September 2016. It's a pretty day here in Indiana this morning. It's in probably about the early 70s right now. Not much of a breeze blowing. Looking to be a pretty day today. Supposed to get up about 90 degrees. Hope it's a nice, pretty day wherever you are. We got a lot of news to report to you today, so I'm just going to get right on into it. The first one that we have here is out of Oregon, and it's off the, what do they call this site? The opb.org news site. That's what it says here. It says charges dismissed against refuge occupier Pete Santilli, which is kind of a misnomer since he never actually occupied the the refuge, but okay, that's what they say here. It says U.S. District Court Judge Anna Brown has approved federal prosecutors' request to dismiss charges against Malheur National Wildlife Refuge occupier Pete Santilli. Federal prosecutors filed a motion seeking to dismiss charges against Santilli Tuesday afternoon. The government has decided that the interests of justice do not support further pursuit of these charges against Santilli. Prosecutors wrote in the motion. The trial of Santilli and 7 other refuge occupiers was set to begin Wednesday with jury selection in downtown Portland. The case will move forward without Santilli. Santilli is an internet radio host who broadcasts live from the wildlife refuge during the occupation. Santilli's attorney, Thomas Cohn, argued that his client's presence as a journalist at the wildlife refuge was protected by the First Amendment. He said he'd been pushing for the government to dismiss the charges against Santilli. This is something that we've been pushing for a long time, said Tom Cohn, Pete Santilli's defense attorney. I've always believed that Pete never had any criminal intent in what he did out there. He came out here with the intent to report and to document and to lawfully protest. Deb Jordan, Santilli's partner and fellow journalist, said Pete didn't have to make a deal. He didn't have to turn against people he stood for. He didn't have to do any of those things. He stood on principle, and on principle of type of journalism that he does. And he stayed steadfast that he was not guilty, Jordan said. Santilli still faces several charges in Nevada for a 2014 standoff with the Bureau of Land Management, where he's accused of conspiring to assault federal officers and brandishing a firearm in relation to a crime of violence. You have the information on that. He's not released from jail now. He's still in jail because he has to face the charges in Nevada. But I would suspect that those charges will probably be dropped as well. So we shall see. But there you have the information as I know it. The next one we have here is off of the Daily Sheeple, and it says 40,000 students in limbo, 8,000 employees fired as ITT technical institutes suddenly shut down. Get it to scroll up here. It says the long-running tragic saga of ITT Education Services, which was established nearly 50 years ago and operates the ITT Technical Institute for-profit college chain, finally came to an end this morning with both a bang and a whimper when it announced that it is shutting down effective immediately, leaving the fate of 40,000 students currently enrolled in limbo and some 8,000 workers without a job. The company said the closure is due to an investigation and sanctions by the U.S. Department of Education. With profound regret that we must report that ITT Educational Services Incorporated will discontinue academic operations at all of its ITT technical institutes permanently after approximately 50 years of continuous service, the company stated Tuesday. Effective today, the company has eliminated the positions of the overwhelming majority of our more than 8,000 employees. As previously reported, ITT Tech stopped enrolling new students on August the 29th, just a few days after it was cut off from a significant amount of federal funding by the government. ITT's collapse was catalyzed when the Department of Education effectively killed the company 2 weeks ago when it told the company on August 25th that it couldn't enroll new students who used federal financial aid. The school accused federal officials of forcing the closure and denying it due process. The company has been the subject of state and federal probes for various reasons, including its recruitment tactics, lending practices, and job placement figures. Among the measures imposed, ITT has been ordered to pay $152 million to the department within 30 days to cover student refunds and other liabilities in case the company closes. The chain, based in Indiana, is still paying another $44 million demanded by the department in June for the same reason. In order to have access to federal student loans, schools need to be accredited by a government-recognized accredited agency. ITT Educational Services was found to be out of compliance with its accreditor standards twice this year, according to the Department of Education. Needless to say, for-profit schools tend to rely heavily on federal student aid. The Accredited Council for Independent Colleges and Schools recently asked the company for proof of why its accreditation should not be withdrawn or suspended. ITT's death, while sudden, should not come as a surprise. Enrollment has been slipping for a while. In July, the company reported its new student enrollment dropped almost 22% from the same period the year before. Meanwhile, roughly 40,000 students currently enrolled now find themselves in limbo. When a school closes its doors, it can leave its students stuck without a degree and massive student loans. ITT's collapse is reminiscent of Corinthian colleges, which filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in May of 2015 in the wake of alleged predatory lending practices and accusations of inflated job placement numbers, leaving about 16,000 students stuck without a degree and thousands more with huge debt. Some students were eventually able to receive debt relief. Cited by PIX 11, the Department of Education has said that ITT Educational Services students should be eligible for closed school loan discharge. However, that process may take years to complete. Meanwhile, the prospect of earning a college diploma, even if from a novelty school, has evaporated. Enrollment in for-profit schools increased in the years following the recession when the job growth was weak and people were looking to hone their skills or switch to more in-demand careers. So there's the information on ITT Technical Institute, and I suspect we're going to see a lot more of that sort of thing going on in the near future. The next thing we have here is off of allenbwest.com. It says, immediately after Trump's visit, Mexico makes stunning announcement. Donald Trump has been rough on Mexico when it comes to the topic of illegal immigration this election cycle, promising not only to build a wall to combat illegal immigration, but make Mexico pay for it. If it seems like punishment to some extent, it is. But when you consider the cost to American taxpayers from illegal immigration, it's not at all unjustified. Trump plans on using a ban on remittances to Mexico as leverage, as that benefits the Mexican economy to the tune of $24 to $25 billion a year. It would be cheaper for them to make one-time payment towards a wall than to suffer the lost remittances, Trump argues. Following a meeting with Mexico's president, who suffered criticism for even daring to meet with Trump, Mexico's government is planning to hedge against Trump's victory come November, as the Irish Times reported. It says Mexico is to consider revoking a series of treaties, including the 1948 agreement that transferred half of its territory to the United States, if the Republican candidate wins the presidency and rips up the North American Free Trade Agreement, according to a bill to be presented to Congress. The initiative, to be proposed on Tuesday by Armando Rios Peter, a left-wing senator, follows last week's criticized meeting between Mexican President Enrique Pena Nieto and U.S. presidential contender Donald Trump, which inflamed public opinion and sparked a cabinet rift. Mr. Pena Nieto has faced a fierce backlash at home over what many saw as his red carpet treatment of Mr. Trump, who has branded Mexicans rapist and wants to build a border wall that he insists Mexico will pay for. This is the first step toward establishing a public policy about how Mexico should react in the face of a threat, Mr. Rios Piter told the Financial Times. The bill is simply to protect a successful 22-year-old relationship, NAFTA, that has helped both nations, he said. We want to defend that from a position that seeks to destroy it. We have to put it in black and white. The initiative would make it illegal for Mexico to use official cash to fund the building of a border wall. And Mr. Trump attempted to seize the $24 billion in annual remittances from the U.S. to Mexico to pay for it. The bill would empower Mexico to retaliate in kind by impounding the same sum, probably through a tax on remittances heading in the other direction. What a threat. While Mexico receives more money from remittances than oil revenue, the same cannot be said of us. The size of our economy, measured in terms of gross domestic product, nearly surpassed 18 trillion last year. Seems we'll survive without a few remittances Mexico sends our direction. And the next one that I have is off of Liberty Writers News, and it says Donald Trump got the greatest endorsement of all time today. It says Donald Trump has just earned the endorsement of 88 retired generals and admirals. He is going to lock down the support of the military, y'all. Trump's campaign unveiled the letter of support today. The letter of support was organized by Major General Sidney Shacknow, a 40-year Army vet and Holocaust survivor, and Rear Admiral Charles Williams. They unleashed this letter right before Trump's speech today in Virginia Beach. Look what Shacknow said, that Trump has the temperament to commander-in-chief. I think it should be to be commander-in-chief, but I'm reading it what it says, and is more trusted than Clinton. Let me repeat that for all the liberals out there. Trump has the temperament to be commander-in-chief, said Shacknow. The generals also went into detail by saying that there are potentially extremely perilous consequences to the budget cuts and policy choices that Democrats have taken. They have emboldened our enemies and weakened America as a result. You can watch his amazing speech in a video here on this website if you want to take a look at it. All these URLs are in the description of the video for you. And it goes on to say that is especially the case if our government persists in the practices that have brought us to the present pass, they wrote. For this reason, we support Donald Trump and his commitment to rebuild our military, to secure our borders, to defeat Islamic supremacy adversaries, and to restore law and order domestically. We urge our fellow Americans to do the same. Trump called the endorsement a great honor and said the following: we can only make America great again if we ensure our military remains the finest fighting force in the world, and that's exactly what I will do as president. This is why we need Donald Trump. He is the only one that will be able to build our military up and make America the strongest country in the world. Let's fight the liberal media. They are going to sweep the news under the rug. Our fighting men and women believe that Trump is the right temperament to be president. And so you have that article. Then the next one that we have here is off of abcnews.go.com. The FBI warns Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton staffers to beware of foreign spies in the U.S. And I think it's got something it's wanting to play here, and we got to get that shut down. Yeah, it's wanting to play something.
We see your production,
for goodness sakes.
We see
Stop that foolishness. There we go. Okay. It says, be careful when you're meeting new people in the nation's capital and elsewhere, because you could be prime target for foreign spies. That's the warning FBI agents gave presidential campaign staffers Wednesday during two separate security briefings in Washington, D.C., according to sources. While the briefings were portrayed as routine, they come amid increasing aggressive efforts by foreign governments to access U.S. secrets and potentially influence incoming elections here, or upcoming elections here. FBI chief responds to concern over cyber threats to U.S. election system. And top intel officials tells Americans to end hyperventilation over DNC hack, but calls breach potentially serious. It says Wednesday's unclassified briefings were held just blocks from the White House in the building shared by rival transition teams for Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, the sources said. An FBI official described the sessions as voluntary awareness briefings provided to low-level staffers of the two major party campaigns every president election cycle. Each briefing Wednesday morning session for the Trump team and a later one for the Clinton team lasted about an hour, ABC News was told. One campaign source said FBI agents laid out a standard best practices briefing, emphasizing it was not precipitated by any particular or known threat. Nevertheless, the FBI official acknowledged the unique threat environment facing the United States, particularly espionage efforts from Russia. Officials acknowledged early this week that suspected Russian hackers successfully stole voter-related information from the election system in Illinois. Around the same time, a known Russian hacker investigated a cyber attack on Arizona's election systems, but attempts to access the system failed, according to a spokesman for the spokesman for the Secretary of State's office in Arizona. Meanwhile, the FBI is still investigating what appears to be coordinated cyber attacks on the Domestic National Committee, let me try that again. Meanwhile, the FBI is still investigating what appears to be coordinated cyber attacks on the Democratic National Committee and other Democratic organizations. Authorities suspect the computer-based assaults were likely launched out of Russia, according to sources. The nation's top intelligence official recently said it's not surprising to see Russians trying to undermine the U.S. political process, especially because Russian President Vladimir Putin is paranoid about the potential for a color revolution to occur in Russia. They believe we're trying to influence political developments in Russia. We're trying to affect change. And so their natural response is to retaliate and do unto us as they think we've done unto them. Director of National Intelligence James Clapper said in July at the annual Aspen Security Forum in Aspen, Colorado. The last time two non-incumbents were majority party nominees for the White House in 2008, foreign spies engaged in espionage activity like no other presidential campaign before it, according to a document from Clapper's office cited by the Associated Press. Leading up to that election, foreign spies met with campaign contacts and staff, used human source networks for policy insights, exploited technology to get otherwise sensitive data, engaged in perception management to influence policy, said the document, which was used in a slideshow warning new Obama administration officials that they could be targeted by foreign spies. Wednesday's session likely mirror the briefings that the FBI routinely gives to staffers working in the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives and to others working in government-related affairs across the country. So there's that information. The next one that I have for you is off of MSN.com, and it says, bad luck and worse manners tarnish Obama's Asian trip. And it says, this is out of Vientiane, Laos. I guess it's Vientiane. Okay, President Obama has grown accustomed to having his foreign travels overshadowed by terrorist attacks or police shootings. This might be the first time has been marred by bad manners. On his final visit to Asia as president this week, Mr. Obama had intended to confront America's wartime legacy in Laos and to reaffirm his strategic pivot to the region. Like all presidential trips, it has been meticulously planned to showcase achievements, a climate change partnership with China, and vigorous American engagement with China's neighbors. But in 4 messy days, the president lost the clear message choreographed by his advanced staff. There was the chaotic arrival ceremony in China, in which missing aircraft stares unexpectedly trumped the theme of global warming, and then the ugly personal outburst that prompted Mr. Obama to cancel a meeting with the new leader of the Philippines, an ally the United States will need in coming contest with China for regional influence. On Tuesday, the White House scrambled to limit the fallout from skipping a meeting with Duterte, the Philippine president, and Mr. Obama pulled the plug after hearing that Mr. Duterte, I'm guessing at that, had unleashed a profane diatribe against him, threatening to repeat it to Mr. Obama's face, and if he dared ask him about recent extrajudicial killings in his country. Mr. Obama is dealing with other headwinds, not least that he is a lame duck leader in the last 5 months of his term. Back home, his struggles are viewed through the unforgiving lens of election year politics. Donald J. Trump, the Republican nominee, tweeted that the Chinese snubbed Mr. Obama and that Mr. Duterte called him a son of a whore. Terrible. For a president eager to burnish his legacy, the trip has in fact yielded progress on several fronts, most notably climate change, but the miscues illustrate how poor planning or even plain bad luck can undermine a president's performance abroad. Worse, the dispute with Mr. Duterte, or gosh, I don't know, carries genuine risk for the United States, given the sensitive role of the Philippines as an American treaty ally that is engaged in an increasing dangerous standoff with Beijing over maritime claims in the South China Sea. Scrapping the meeting, American officials insisted, was less an expression of Mr. Obama's peak than a recognition that the news media would treat it as a spectacle. All of the focus was on those comments, said Benjamin J. Rhodes, the Deputy National Security Advisor. We felt it did not create a constructive environment for a bilateral meeting. Mr. Rhodes insisted that the alliance between the United States and the Philippines was rock solid. The two countries worked together on a range of issues, from drug interdiction to counterterrorism. He said it was possible that Mr. Obama might run into Mr. Duterte anyway, since the two are attending a meeting of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations here in Vietnam. Said Mr. Obama's decision to cancel the meeting was exactly the right choice. She said the president was likely to raise concerns about extrajudicial killings of alleged drug dealers, and when the president of the Philippines insulted our president, it was appropriate in a very low-key way to say, sorry, no meeting. Mr. Duterte seemed eager to diffuse the situation. In a statement, he said that he regretted his comments came across as a personal attack on the U.S. president. He said he had overreacted to reports that Mr. Obama planned to lecture him in their meeting about his unorthodox methods in combating drug trade. We look forward to ironing out differences arising out of national priorities and perceptions, Mr. Duterte said, and working in mutually responsible ways for both our countries. For Mr. Obama, it was an unseemly distraction from what he hoped would be a somber day of remembrance and reconciliation. The first president to visit Laos, Mr. Obama came with a pledge of double American aid to $30 million a year over 3 years to help Laotians find unexploded bombs in their forests and fields. The United States dropped more than 2 million tons of explosives on this country during its secret war from 1964 to 1973. Legacy Mr. Obama said too few Americans understood. As one Laotian said, the bombs fell like rain. He said to a polite audience at the Lao National Cultural Hall. There was no evidence that Mr. Duterte's tiff with Mr. Obama mattered much to Laotians, but it could matter more to Philippine-American relations than Mr. Rhodes' reassuring words suggest. Mr. Duterte appeared determined to carve out a more independent foreign policy than his reliably pro-American predecessor, Benigno S. Aquino III. He has talked about trying to settle an impasse with China over the Scarborough Shoal of rocks in the South China Sea. The United States worries that China will use its influence to pressure its neighbors into agreement over disputed reefs and shoals throughout the South China Sea that could eventually hinder the freedom of navigation for American ships. Mr. Rhodes said the United States would give the Philippines leeway to negotiate an agreement with China, with the important caveat that it adhere to international law. That is a message Mr. Obama would likely have given Mr. Duterte in person. We should prepare for a wild ride, since the constantly changing outbursts of President Duterte undermine the stability of the government's foreign policy, including U.S.-Philippine relations. Ramon Caspil, head of the Institute for Political and Electoral Reform in Manila, the diatribe against Mr. Obama, he said, was a knee-jerk as an outburst, but calculated to produce a certain breathing space for negotiations with China. Mr. Obama had his own awkwardness with Chinese when he arrived at a group of 20 summit meetings Saturday. Last-minute dispute over who would drive the staircase to the doorway on Air Force One forced him to exit from a door in the plane's belly. White House officials attributed the dispute to inexperienced, overzealous security officials rather than any premeditated effort to humiliate Mr. Obama. I read in the article that I put out yesterday. Okay, but the images of Chinese guards shouting at reporters and hassling the president and national security advisor, Susan E. Rice, added to sense that the Chinese were sticking a thumb in his eye. As the Philippine Affairs Administration officials said, the airport scene would have no spillover effect. Mr. Obama himself described the visit as extraordinarily productive, noting that he and President Xi Jinping had continued their landmark collaboration on climate change. None of this detracts from the broader scope of the relationship, he said. And yet, administration officials showed delight in the fact that when Mr. Obama left Hangzhou on Monday evening, the Chinese moved a shiny staircase with blue lights to the side of Air Force One. The next one I have for you is off of WND.com, and it says, Top Doc says Hillary should have a neurological exam. And this says President Obama's former doctor says Democratic Party nominee Hillary Clinton should have a neurological exam, indicating the checkup would ensure she isn't losing her cognitive abilities due to her history of brain injury. Dr. David Schneer, Obama's physician for 22 years, told CNN Tuesday that a 2-page note Clinton provided from her doctor after follow-up testing in 2013 is simply not enough to show she's fully recovered. There are a number of questions I have. First of all, she's almost 68 years old. While I think that medical letter was well written and was very professional, it's not enough. For example, she's on Coumadin, a medication to prevent blood clots. You have to monitor that. It says she's being monitored regularly. I'd like to know how well she's being controlled. That's a difficult drug to use. Schneer continued, I think she should have had a neurological examination, a thorough neurological examination in 2016. We know that that happens to football players who have had concussions, how they begin to lose some of their cognitive ability. In 2008, Schneer provided a letter for Obama saying the future president was in excellent health while he was campaigning for the White House. Schneer also said GOP nominee Donald Trump should release medical records with detailed information about the candidate rather than a quickly drafted note from a doctor. You think I need real details? I think you need actual medical records. Just somebody making a few statements about astoundingly excellent, that's not good enough, he continued. I'd like to know his height, weight, and to know what his BMI is. He looks a little bit overweight to me. Schneer said he thinks both nominees should release their records. Trump raised the issue to a new level, CNN reported, by challenging Clinton to release detailed medical records, insisting he would have no problem with his own becoming public. Trump tweeted, I think that both candidates, Crooked Hillary and myself, should release detailed medical records. I have no problem in doing so. Hillary? And WND reported many physicians based on publicly available information have raised concerns about Clinton's health. Among them are Dr. Jane Orion, MD, Executive Director of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, said images of Clinton being helped upstairs and showing odd seizure-like head movements require an explanation to voters, she contends. The author of Emerging Disease, Protecting Your Family from Pandemics, Viral Threats, and Rogue Vaccines noted the vituperation and anger, I think that's what it is, and she faced for raising questions. I'm not making a diagnosis, she told WND on Monday, but I can look at the video. You can look, she said, for a medical professional, so simply to ignore the evidence would be completely reckless. Meeting someone with these symptoms personally would require a "how are you?" she said. There are not ridiculous questions. Dr. Lee Heeb, author of Surviving the Medical Meltdown, Your Guide to Living Through the Disaster of Obamacare, agreed. They made a huge deal about Senator John McCain because of his melanoma. She told WND, melanoma doesn't give you dementia. She said the images and videos are evidence that should be reviewed and explained to voters, contending Clinton is not being forthcoming. If she doesn't want the American people informed, we know where she stands. Citing Clinton's previous concussion, Herb said such injuries can cause long-term side effects, seizures, personality changes, and cognitive defects. The Fox News Medical A-team, Dr. Mark Siegel and Dr. David Samdi, had questions. In 2008, I looked over 1,000 pages of John McCain's records because of a melanoma he had 10 years ago. What about Hillary? In 2009, a severe fall. She breaks her elbow. In 2011, she boards a plane, falls. In 2012, she had a severe concussion, which Bill Clinton says took her 6 months to recover from, Siegel said. He continued, then she ends up with a blood clot in her brain and a lifetime of blood thinners. Just that point alone, she's prone to falling. You can see from that picture up there that it looked like she can barely get upstairs without two people carrying her. Guess what? If she falls and hits her head, she'll get a blood clot. Somebody added, the picture going up the stairs speaks a million words. Is she fatigued? Is she dehydrated? One of the main reasons she fell in 2012 and had the concussion was severe dehydration. They're holding her and going upstairs, so she may really be dehydrated. She may have arthritis. She may have back pain. She may have fallen again. We don't know. Dr. Drew Pinsky's television show on the HLN cable network, Dr. Drew on Call, was canceled after he raised questions about Clinton's health in an interview on KABC AM in Los Angeles. Dr. Gerhard Gianoli argued that if the concerns were about Donald Trump's health, established media would spotlight the issue. He wrote, imagine, if you would, that tomorrow Donald Trump suffers a concussion. Suppose he trips on a flight of stairs, falling down and hitting his head. The head injury is so severe that he is unconscious for a time and has to be hospitalized for a week. After getting out of the hospital, the Trump campaign tells us that he is fully recovered and that there are no lingering effects of the head trauma. During the following weeks, he is seen in public to wear glasses with a Fresnel lens on one side. He also seems to have trouble maintaining his balance, loses his thoughts in the middle of speeches, and has episodes of spasmodic movements suggestive of seizures. In this imaginary scenario, would it surprise anyone if the media became skeptical and pressed for release of Mr. Trump's medical records. Would it surprise anyone if the Clinton campaign made an issue of Mr. Trump's health status during speeches and at TV ads? Would the media cry foul over the Clinton campaign doing so? I think the answers to these questions are self-evident. The media and Clinton campaign would be all over this like white on rice, and no one would question the appropriateness of their actions. To my knowledge, Mr. Trump had no such issues with his health. However, Mrs. Clinton had multiple problems. Some she revealed and some that she has not revealed. Guyanoli, in private practice in Covington, Louisiana, and faculty member at Tulane University School of Medicine, has pioneered treatments in his specialty areas, and he's been granted the American Academy of Octogenarianology Honor Award, among others. And this article goes on if you would like to read the rest of that, but you get the basic gist, I think. To give up her records. Let's find out what's going on with her. The next one we have here is off of freebeacon.com. Obama appointee manages Soros-backed election fund. Administration appointee manages a fund that liberal billionaire George Soros issues. Good golly. Try that again. An Obama administration appointee manages a fund that liberal billionaire George Soros used to bankroll election-related, like increasing the number of voters of color and improving odds of electing preferred candidates, actions that are discussed in recently released documents. Karen Narasaki, a commissioner of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, manages the Soros-backed Shelby Response Fund. The fund's objective is protecting voting rights in states formerly covered under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And uncovered by the group's DC leaks reveals the plans of Soros Open Society Foundation that are geared primarily toward minority voters. The focus of the portfolio going forward will be on voters of color, reducing barriers and fighting suppressive measures which impede access to the polls, increase ease of registration and access to early voting, and improving odds of electing candidates of choice. The document states, we will also fund alternative election reform measures that have been shown to better benefit people of color, same-day registration and early voting. The document then describes funding of census-related activities such as a redesign of racial categories as part of the group's 2020 strategy. Advocates have about a year and a half to influence appropriations for the Census Bureau. The redesign of racial categories on census instrument and policy regarding how to count persons who are incarcerated, the group wrote. Census topics must be presented to Congress in April 2017 with final questions by April of 2018. This goal would be achieved by putting money behind groups like National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, NALEO, and Leadership Conference, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AC, and DEMOS, a public policy organization. Grants would also be awarded to media groups to generate stories and educate journalists. The New American Media Coalition of Ethnic Media Outlets was named as one such organization. New America Media partners with journalism schools across the United States. New America Media has been quite effective with the small grant it received from Shelby Response Fund in generating voting stories in the ethnic media. It says funding an ethnic media project in the advance of the 50th anniversary of Voting Rights Act will be an opportunity to educate journalists, connect advocates with ethnic media outlets, and cover current issues as well as history. There is also a great need for communications trainings for advocates and perhaps the establishment of a hub. The Open Society Foundation wrote of its plan to challenge voter identification laws through litigation. The Shelby convening report has identified an exploding need for litigation funding. The document states, later adding 2015 and 2016 will be critical years for continuation of cases and bringing of new cases under Section 2 and possible state voting rights act that are passed, especially since a voter ID case is headed to the Supreme Court and will be argued and decided in 2015-2016. The Shelby Response Fund has received millions in contributions from just 7 foundations, according to a separate document released by DC Leaks. The Open Society Foundation has been its biggest donor. A spokesman for the Open Society Foundation issued a statement about the hacked documents. A number of Open Society Foundation internal documents, including strategies, work plans, and funding requests, have been published after being removed from an online community that served as a resource for our staff, board members, and partners, the spokesperson said. In some cases, the materials reflect big picture strategies over several years from within the Open Society Foundation's network, which supports human rights, democratic practice, and the rule of law in more than 100 countries around the world. This attack is a symptom of an aggressive assault on civil society and human rights activists that is taking place globally. The Open Society Foundation support efforts to encourage wider participation in U.S. elections and oppose measures used to try to suppress voter participation, the spokesperson said. A top priority of Soros Foundation is enlarging the U.S. electorate by at least 10 million voters by 2018, the Washington Free Beacon previously reported. Soros has thrown millions behind legal challenges and against voter identification laws in numerous states. These lawsuits are argued by Hillary Clinton's top campaign lawyer, Mark Ellis, who is acting independently of the campaign in his capacity as an attorney at the DC-based law firm Perkins Cole. The next one that I have here is off of the latest, or the last great stand, and it says, Soros, Western society must fall before the world government can be established. This dude's just a regular Napoleon, ain't he? It says, in the following video, Alex Jones begins by making a general statement in response to a question he's been asked more times than he cares to count over the course of his professional career. The question always comes from the willfully ignorant, normally a very condescending tone, and it often sounds something like, if there's really a big bad secret world government, then where is it? And tell us who runs it. Alex's response is perfect. He says it's really not a secret who runs the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's really not a secret who runs IMF and the World Bank. It's also really not a secret who runs the nations, or the United Nations. These days, the globalists are so over the top and in our faces about what they're doing. Sometimes information is learned that can later appear to have been kept secret. But that's normally more the result of public's limited access to programs inside certain institutions rather than a deliberate effort to conceal information. The insanity of it all is that global elite have brainwashed the masses, largely with the assistance of globalist-run mainstream media, to disregard what their own eyes and ears tell them. For example, George Soros admits he's been the financial backing to the refugee crisis that has brought Europe to its knees. And he admits that he's funding the far left group Black Lives Matter here in the US, but yet anyone that brings up either is somehow branded a conspiracy theorist. Can anyone explain this to me? To make matters worse, not only has much of what conspiracy theorists claim to be true already been committed to writing and published by the elite, try actually reading in Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030, but there are huge amounts of what conspiracy theorists are warning about that have already been voted into binding legislation too. Furthermore, those who are carrying out such acts claim to be operating under some imagined diplomatic immunity, making them free from prosecution. As Alex rightfully points out, Soros and company aren't secret about much of anything these days. People have become so ignorant that no one even bats an eyelash when a globalist thug freely speaks out about his intention to use the UN's Migrant Council as a weapon to undermine national homogeneity. That is utterly insane. He should be locked up. We live in a time when the head of the UN's Migrant Council is openly sharing his intent to use his authority to deliberately undermine the sovereignty of countries for no other reason than that their population is naturally indigenous or potentially more predisposed to being white. What? It also shocks the conscience that in a day and age when information is available at the click of a button, that there could still be so many of the smug, condescending types who like to laugh, point fingers, and yell conspiracy theory when issues this serious are discussed. Seriously, it's almost as if a level of weapons grade stupidity, ignorance, or perhaps both somehow got released into the atmosphere or something, because who could possibly be that clueless? Yet, here we are. And there's some more information in the bottom of that about what the Tea Party has to say about it and all that, if you want to read the rest of it. And the next one that I have is off of CNBC, and it says, Jack Ma, I'm not worried about anti-China sentiment on campaign trail. And it's got an ad here that's trying to get in my way. Let's see. Alibaba founder Jack Ma told CNBC on Thursday he's not worried about anti-China sentiment on the U.S. campaign trail because people will come to their senses after the election. I'm 52 years old now. I've seen a lot of American presidential elections, and every time before the elections, they are always anti-China, the executive chairman of the Chinese e-commerce giant said. Many years ago, they were anti-Soviet Union. Now they're anti-China. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump frequently says America will win against China if he's elected president, and he accuses the country for currency manipulation and intellectual property theft. Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton has called out China for its aggressive actions in the Asia-Pacific region. Both candidates have struck an anti-globalization tone and say they oppose trade deal among 12 Pacific Rim nations supported by President Barack Obama. China is not a party to the deal. Ma, an outspoken proponent of globalization, will present his plan for an electronic world trade platform called the EWTP, there we go, an online exchange to help promote global trade at this week's G20 meeting in Hangzhou, China. The EWTP's goal, according to Ma, would be to help small businesses buy and sell abroad over the internet and have access to special free trade zones in various countries. I think globalization is a great thing, but it is not perfect. We have to improve globalization now, this period called the growing pain globalization, he told CNBC on the sidelines of the meeting. The last 20 years, globalization was helping big companies develop nations. A key component of the anti-globalization tone seen around the world is anti-trade sentiment, which is frequently directed toward countries such as China and India, where the relative cost of production is lower. Common arguments put forward against the free trade include foreign companies undercutting local businesses by selling goods at a much cheaper price, and local jobs being outsourced by multinationals to countries where the labor cost is much lower. But Ma disagreed. Likening trade to freedom, trade is something that killed the wars. It is a communication and culture and values. A reversal of globalization due to the rise in anti-trade rhetoric and increased protectionism would prove to be a disaster for the world, according to Ma, particularly for the younger generation. Alibaba is one of China's most valuable technology behemoths, with notable success in establishing an e-commerce service that has seen transactions carried out by third-party sellers on its platforms amount to as much as 837 billion yuan in its latest results. Globally, Alibaba's competitors include the likes of Amazon and eBay. Somebody has to stand up and say, we should not be anti-trade, said Ma. For you is off of the dailymail.co.uk, and it says Vladimir Putin's official car is involved in a head-on crash in Moscow, which killed the Russian president's favorite chauffeur. Russian media has revealed that the head-on crash, in which a man was killed, involved Vladimir Putin's official black BMW. However, the Russian president was not in the car at the time when it was struck head-on by another vehicle which crossed over from the opposite side of the road. CCTV images of the footage taken on Kutuzovsky Avenue in Russian capital Moscow show the Mercedes collided head-on with the presidential BMW. In this article, if you want to see those, the Russian media said that the car was being driven by Putin's favorite official driver and that he was killed instantly, but that the president was not in the vehicle at the time. The car is officially registered as belonging to Federation Council, also known as the Russian Senate or Upper Chamber of Parliament. Medics arrived at the scene and said that the presidential driver had been killed on the spot, while the Mercedes driver, who was traveling alone, has been taken to the hospital in critical condition. The driver who was killed was not named, although it was reported that he had notched up more than 40 years of driving experience as an official driver. The police have only confirmed that they are investigating without giving any further details. The cleanup operation took several hours, and a huge traffic jam formed when Kutuzovsky Avenue was closed after the crash. So there's the information on that. The next one is off of the Daily Sheeple, and it says vaccine bombshell. Most vaccines confirmed to be tainted with glyphosate. You know what that is? Monsanto's Roundup. And there's an editor's note here. It says, if this isn't slow kill, can someone explain what is? Would this explain all the skyrocketing food allergies? The article reads, research scientist Anthony Samsel has confirmed that glyphosate, a key active chemical in Monsanto's herbicide Roundup, has been found in most vaccines. In this video, we hear Dr. Samsel reciting his findings. So if you want to see that video, it's right there in that article. It says, additionally, Dr. Samsel sent a letter to his congressional senator from New Hampshire, wherein he gives Senator Saheen permission to share his laboratory data on glyphosate-contaminated vaccines with all members of Congress and the public. What will Senator Shaheen do? Will she have presence of conscience to do what U.S. Congressman Bill Posey of Florida did when in July of 2015 he went before Congress to ask for a congressional investigation into the science, fraud, and collusion regarding the MMR vaccine, autism connection found in African-American boys under 3 years of age, as exposed in 2014 by CDC etymologist William Thompson, PhD, one of the co-authors of CDC report, which eliminated that pertinent data and documentation from CDC's published information. One of the most important biochemical reasons for getting to the bottom of the glyphosate fiasco being perpetuated upon the U.S. and global citizens by the chemical and agricultural industries is that glyphosate is supposedly safe. Nothing's further from the scientific fact. Here is one specific reason. Glyphosate's suppression of cytochrome P450 enzymes and amino acid biosynthesis by gut microbe and pathways to modern diseases. Not only are humans exposed to glyphosate from numerous sources, herbicides, pesticides, sprays, GMO crops, foods, ingredients in processed foods as residues, we now have confirmed scientific research and numerical data that glyphosate is present in vaccines, which are injected into infants, toddlers, teens, and adults. Compounding the above science is the fact that no one at the U.S. CDC, FDA, even is considering the most Elemental scientific theorism. Chemical interaction, such as vaccine ingredients given 9 vaccines at one time. In high school chemistry, aren't students taught the importance of chemical interactions, especially when mixing several chemicals in a laboratory beaker? What can happen? An explosion. A similar chemical reaction occurs within the human body, the largest living working test tube on Earth. However, it causes adverse health effects, not an explosion. And yet those who should know how science and chemicals work synergistically continue to pollute the human organism with more and more toxins, including nanoparticles, which also are in vaccines. The defense for the above statement I made, I direct readers to the 2014 published article, Major Pesticides Are More Toxic to Human Cells Than Their Declared Active Principles, and what's stated in the abstract. And this is how it reads. Pesticides are used throughout the world as mixtures called formulations. They contain adjuvants, which are often kept confidential and are called inerts by manufacturing companies, plus a declared active principle, which usually tested alone. We tested the toxicity of 9 pesticides comparing active principles and their formulations on 3 human cell lines, the HEPG2, HEK293, and the JEG3. Glyphosate, isoproton, fluoroxyphil, I can't even pronounce all these. There's a whole list of them, and it goes on and on. I'm not going to stutter and stagger over them. Respectively, the active principles of 3 major herbicides, 3 insecticides, and 3 fungicides. We measured mitochondrial insecticides and we measured mitochondrial activities, membrane degradations, and caspases, 3 to 7 activities. Fungicides were the most toxic from concentrations 300 to 600 times lower than agricultural pollutions, followed by herbicides and then insecticides with very similar profiles in all cell types. Despite its relatively benign reputation, Roundup was among the most toxic herbicides and insecticides tested. Most importantly, 8 formulations out of 9 were up to 1,000 times more toxic than their active principles. Our result challenged the relevance of the acceptable daily intake for pesticides because this norm calculated from the toxicity of the active principles alone. Chronic tests on pesticides may have reflect relevant environmental exposures if only one ingredient of these mixtures is tested alone. Furthermore, glyphosate is known to promote endocrine disrupting effects after entering cells. However, glyphosates can be only the tip of the iceberg because, according to researchers investigating formulations as mixtures, since pesticides are always used with adjuvants, the same as vaccines use adjuvants, that could change their toxicity. The necessity to assess their whole formulations as mixtures becomes obvious. Although the above articles talked about pesticides, I think everyone regards pesticides as any chemical that category as bug killer or insect killer. Pesticides are a class chemical designed to kill pests, rodents, insects, or plants that may affect agricultural crops or carry diseases like malaria and typhus. The fact that those chemicals are designed to kill indicates the harms they can do to any living organism, regardless of exposure or dilution. There are some man-made chemicals that can be diluted to the ratio equivalent of a whiskey shot glass of chemicals to a large swimming pool of water and still be deadly. Why are there so many toxic chemicals deliberately placed into vaccines defies my knowledge of science, medicine, nutrition, research, and human empathy on the part of those who are supposed to be protectors of health, the medical profession, such as doctors, nurses, researchers, and pharmaceutical industry. Granted, there are some medical professionals who do not partake in the poisoning of children and expose the chemical horrors of vaccines, but they are vilified, and some supposedly may have been offed for their expository work. Now we have more and definitive confirmation that glyphosate is in most vaccines that are given to infants and children. What more proof do we need for Congress, including the President of the USA, if Black Lives Matter, to demand and perform an independent, thorough investigation and/or criminal trial with outside independent researchers testifying, not Big Pharma's lackey scientists who get to the bottom of why many children are being chemically abused legally too, and why humanity's future generations are being deprived of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What happens to the Nuremberg Code? Everyone talks about the demand of their human rights. However, the most fundamental of rights, such as not being poisoned daily by air, water, and food, or mandatory vaccine injections, are not being addressed and guaranteed by anyone. Why? Shouldn't we make that primary issue and right, especially in view of the CDC's proposed rule to forcefully place citizens into quarantine and receive vaccines irregardless, with the CDC's self-assured rulemaking now that we know glyphosate is in vaccines? So there you have some more information on the vaccines. This next one, this is your inspiration for the day. And this is off of LifeVest. And it's an article about jewel fries from Saskatchewan, Canada. And I thought this kind of hit home, and I just read this one to y'all. Maybe it'll inspire you. Overwhelmed by the negativity she saw reflected in her daily newspaper, Jewel Fry's, LifeVest Inside Wise and Gentle blog guru, decided to try a different approach to life, a kinder approach. Several years ago, Jewel's eyes opened up to a whole other lifestyle when a friend of hers unexpectedly took his life. She realized how important and life-changing acts of kindness could be if we were completely present and took part in the little things. She then made up her mind to switch off from the angst she saw in the news and instead focus on what she could actively do to leave this world a little better. Just the knowledge of what was happening around the world wasn't good enough. I needed to get myself away from the big picture and make the small changes. I needed to make the head and heart connection. It was like second wind for me, the one that pushes you forward when you slow down in a race. Over a short period, several things snowballed, leading to the creation of her inspirational blog, Rise Like Air, and becoming actively involved with organizations such as LifeVest Inside and See Beautiful, which work to bring out the light in people. And then there's another quote here. It says, kindness to me is watching out for little opportunities, to be willing and able to not only help others, but receive help from them as well. Only then does it become full circle. And the article goes on, it says, being as compassionate hasn't always been easy in her life, though. Jewel recounts an experience she had a couple years ago where she encountered an unexpected end to her forever caring nature. She was welcoming guests on a blustery cold day at an event in her children's school as she saw an acquaintance at the entrance on a wheelchair. She offered to lead him to his seat, as she did with all the previous guests, but in return she noticed a black look in his eyes as he told her off with a curt, I can do it myself. Sometimes we need to look at things by how they are perceived and not how it was intended. This experience reminded me of that. I don't know the whole story, but for some reason, maybe what I was trying to do wasn't what he needed, and I had to learn to accept that. Adopting a kindness lifestyle in its entirety to Jewel is best seen as a drop in the glass. She believes that we all have our kindness glasses and we get drips in it every once in a while. While most of her family and peers have been supportive of her kindness lifestyle, she recounts that there are few who don't understand it. However, she views this obstacle as an opportunity to gently leave the door open for them to eventually get there, understanding that we have to be at the right place in our own journey to do so. Some of Jewel's favorite random acts of kindness include paying it forward at drive-thrus, giving spare change to people in queues who need it, and letter writing. Jewel believes that random acts of kindness are important as when you do things anonymously, you are not attached to the outcome and simply believe that whatever you have done is for the best. Speaking of her biggest inspiration for kindness, Jewel dates its origins to her life when she was a child. The McIntyre family was a warm, inviting home near hers who have always led by example in being good to others. She was friends with one of their 8 children, and while they weren't extremely wealthy and had their own share of troubles, their doors were always open to her. They treated me as one of their own, whether I needed a shoulder to cry on or advice. They showed me that you didn't have to have something to give something. So there you have your inspiration. You don't always have to have something to give something. And I hope everybody goes out this afternoon and does a random act of kindness for somebody. And with that, I'm going to close her down for today, and I hope you'll take off your shoes, stick your feet down in the grass outside today, take you a breath of fresh air, and ground yourself, balance yourself. And we'll see you back here tomorrow at noon. Bye.